When we look at the ruins of ancient empires today, we mostly see the gray of sun-bleached stone and the brown of dried earth. Because the colors have faded over thousands of years, it is easy to forget that the ancient world was actually an explosion of vibrant light. We often think of power as something made of heavy metal, crowns of solid gold, shields of polished bronze, or swords of sharpened iron. But across the African continent, there was another form of power that was just as valuable and often much more rare: the power of color. In the ancient and pre-colonial world, a specific shade of blue or a certain tint of red was not just a fashion choice. It was a bank account, a diplomatic message, and a weapon of war. For the great queens of Africa, color was a form of technology. They understood that the human eye responds to certain pigments with fear, respect, or even worship. To own a color that no one else could produce was to own a monopoly that reached across wide oceans and burning deserts. Some queens used the deep, mysterious blue of the indigo plant to build trade networks that connected the heart of the Sahara to the markets of the Mediterranean. Others used the secret red of forest woods to signal their divine right to rule, warning their enemies that they possessed the very life force of the earth. From the colorful geometric codes of the southern plains to the royal purples of the northern seas, color was the silent language of the throne. These women were more than just royalty. They were masters of chemistry and psychology. They knew that the right color could make an army surrender without a fight, or make a merchant travel thousands of miles just to buy a single yard of cloth. Today, we're going to look past the faded stones and the rusted iron. We are going on a journey to discover the vibrant, multicolored history of the women who used the pigments of the earth to build the world's most stunning and wealthy empires. As we leave the grand palaces of the introduction and travel to the edge of the Great Sahara Desert, we find ourselves in the bustling marketplaces of Kano and Zazao. In this part of the world, color was a commodity more stable than salt and more portable than grain. This was the home of the blue gold, a deep, dark, and shimmering dye known as indigo. For the merchant queens of West Africa, indigo was not just a decoration, it was the foundation of an industrial empire. While the rest of the world struggled to find dyes that would stay bright and wouldn't wash away in the rain, the women of the Hausa-lands perfected a secret science. They mastered a fermentation process that made their blue cloth permanent, legendary, and incredibly expensive. To understand the immense wealth of this color, you must look at the indigo dye pits. These were not small pots in a kitchen. They were massive, industrial-scale wells dug deep into the hard earth. Some of these pits were over 20 feet deep, and they have been in use for over 500 years. The process was a masterpiece of chemistry that required patience and precision. Thousands of indigo leaves were dried, crushed into balls, and fermented with ash and water inside these deep pits for weeks. The result was a blue so deep it almost looked black, but with a strange metallic bronze shimmer that caught the sunlight like the scales of a fish. This blue gold was so famous that it created a luxury brand for the entire region. The queens who managed these trade hubs became powerful by taxing and controlling the export of this cloth. They sold it to the Tuareg, the legendary blue men of the Sahara, whose skin would often turn blue from the high-quality dye in their expensive robes. Because this specific shade of blue was so difficult to produce and so beautiful to look at, it was traded gram for gold and ivory. Wearing the Etu indigo cloth was a sign that you were a person of high status, immense riches, and divine favor. These women didn't just sell fabric, they turned the simple leaves of a desert plant into a currency that dominated the trade routes of half a continent. They proved that the most successful leaders are those who can take the raw colors of the earth and turn them into the wealth of a kingdom. But as we move away from the dry, shimmering heat of the desert dye pits, the air begins to change. The sand under our feet turns to soft, damp soil, and the wide-open horizon is replaced by the towering emerald green walls of the tropical rainforest. Here, in the shadows of the giant trees, the cool blue of the north gives way to a color that represents the very heartbeat of the people. In the deep emerald green forests of West and Central Africa, red was never just a color to be looked at, it was a physical manifestation of power. While the blue of the north was the color of trade, red was the color of the life force. For the royal women of the Benin Empire and the legendary Queen Zinga, red was a warning and a blessing at the same time. It represented the earth, the fire of the sun, and the very blood that kept a kingdom alive. To own the sources of red was to own power over life and death. In these empires, the color red was a shield that protected the queen's spirit and a crown that commanded the absolute respect of every subject who saw it. The wealth of this color came from a mysterious tree known as camwood. For centuries, the women of the forest would shave the heartwood of these trees into a fine crimson powder known as osun. This powder was a precious commodity, traded across great distances. It was used to paint the skin of warriors and royals, creating a protective layer that was part medicine and part uniform. But the queens of the Benin Empire took the power of red even further. They controlled the trade of red coral beads, which were often more valuable than gold. Every bead was shaped by hand and polished until it glowed like coal from a fire. A queen covered in red coral was showing the world that she possessed a treasury so deep that she could wear the blood of the sea as her daily garment. Queen Zinga of Matamba used this royal red as a psychological weapon in her fight for independence. When she went to meet foreign diplomats, she was often draped in layers of deep red cloth and surrounded by soldiers wearing crimson. In her culture, red was the color of the ancestors and the color of vengeance. By wearing red, she was telling her enemies that she was backed by the spirits of every warrior who had died for the land. She didn't need to speak a single word of threat. The color of her robes did the talking for her. These queens proved that color could be used to intimidate the strongest armies in the world. They turned a pigment found in the bark of a tree into a symbol of authority that preserved their culture for generations. As we travel away from the red forests and head towards the salt-sprayed shores of the Mediterranean, the colors begin to shift. We leave the heat of the jungle for the cool, deep waters of the northern coast. Here, we find a color so rare and so expensive that it was often called the ghost color, because only the wealthiest people on Earth could ever hope to see it in person. This was Imperial purple, the most expensive and prestigious color in the history of the ancient world. For the queens of the north, this purple was not just a dye, it was a global currency that linked Africa to the palaces of every major empire in existence. The wealth behind this color was hidden inside a tiny, humble sea snail called the murex. For the queens of Carthage, like the legendary founder Queen Dido, these snails were more valuable than a mountain of gold. The process of extracting the color was incredibly difficult and required thousands of workers. To create just 1 small gram of purple dye, workers had to collect and process over 12,000 snails. The work was slow and the smell was famously terrible, but the result was a color that didn't just sit on top of the fabric, it became part of it. This purple was so bright that it seemed to glow, and it was the only dye in the world that actually became more beautiful and vibrant the more it was exposed to the sun. Queen Dido used this snail gold to build one of the most successful trade empires in human history. Carthage became the global center for purple production, and the secret of the dye was protected like a state treasure. Because the color was so difficult and expensive to make, it became the ultimate status symbol. Only the wealthiest queens, generals, and emperors could afford even a small strip of purple cloth. By controlling the supply of this rare pigment, the queens of the north held a financial grip over the Mediterranean. They were the ones who decided who was royal enough to wear the color of the gods. They proved that true wealth is found in the things that are impossible for others to copy, turning a simple sea snail into the foundation of a maritime superpower. As we turn our backs to the Northern Ocean and travel inland, crossing the burning sands toward the high, rugged mountains of the east, the colors transform once again. We are entering a land where the light is so bright it can blind the eyes. A land where the most sacred color of all was believed to be stolen directly from the sun. In the empires of the Ashanti and the ancient kingdom of Axum, yellow and its metallic cousin, gold, was far more than a pigment. It was considered the skin of the sun, a physical piece of the heavens brought down to earth. While other colors were traded for profit, yellow was used to represent the immortal soul of the nation. The queens of these regions used this color to establish a power that was both financial and spiritual. In the forest kingdoms of West Africa, the Ashanti queen mothers oversaw the creation of kente cloth, where yellow silk was woven into patterns that told the secret history of the tribe. Here, color was used as a form of writing. Each yellow thread represented a law or a proverb about prosperity. In the high mountains of Ethiopia, Queen Makeda's people used the yellow of the earth and the glitter of gold to create murals that shimmered in the high-altitude light. They believed that yellow was the only color pure enough to reflect the wisdom of a leader. To protect the value of this color, these queens enforced strict sumptuary laws. These were economic rules that turned color into a weapon of social control. In many of these empires, it was a crime for a commoner to wear the royal yellow without permission. By making the color exclusive to the throne, the queens created a visual monopoly. You could be the wealthiest merchant in the city, but without the queen's favor, you were forbidden from wearing the color of divinity. This was a masterclass in psychological authority. They proved that the most powerful thing a queen can own is a symbol that everyone else is afraid to touch, turning a simple shade of light into a boundary that no one dared to cross. As the golden sun sets over the mountains of the east, we travel to the far southern tip of the continent. Here, the colors stop being symbols of royal luxury and start becoming something much more hidden. We are entering the land of the painted houses, where color was the only secret language left to a people who were forbidden to speak their own names. During the late 19th century, when the Ndebele people were being forced off their lands, the women of the tribe realized they needed a weapon that didn't look like a weapon. They turned to the walls of their homes, transforming them into a canvas for a silent revolution that the world is only now beginning to understand. Using a palette of black, white, and yellow mixed from soot and clay, these women created a sophisticated system of geometric resistance. To an outsider, these were just pretty patterns, but to the Ndebele, every triangle and every square was a telegram. They used these colors to record their family histories, signal warnings about enemy movements, and mark meeting places for their leaders. Because the occupiers viewed these paintings as mere feminine art, they never realized they were looking at a sophisticated military code. The Ndebele mothers proved that color could be used to preserve a culture's soul even when its people were in chains. Their art was a visual shout of defiance that kept their identity alive in a world that tried to erase it. The stories of these queens show us that the history of Africa is not a faded gray memory stored in a dusty book. It is a living, breathing world of vibrant blue, royal red, and sacred gold. From the industrial dye pits of the north to the coated walls of the south, color was the engine of trade, the symbol of authority, and the language of survival. These women understood a truth that we are only rediscovering today, that to control the colors of the world is to control how the world sees you. They were the chemists who mastered the plants, the merchants who valued the pigments, and the leaders who wore their power for everyone to see. Their legacy is still alive today, not just in museums, but in the bright fabrics of the markets and the bold flags that fly over the continent. They remind us that true power is not just about what you own, but about the beauty and the meaning you create with it. The crowns of these queens may have been made of metal, but their empires were built in every color of the rainbow. But these stories are only the beginning. For too long, these vibrant chapters of history have been left in the shadows, waiting for a new generation to bring them into the light. History is not just something we study, it is something we carry. Every time we share these stories, we add a new layer of color to a world that has been gray for far too long. If you believe that these stories deserve to be heard, then I invite you to be part of this journey. Subscribe and join our community as we continue to peel back the layers of the past to find the truth about the empires that built our world. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a step in our journey across the continent. And most importantly, share this video. Send it to someone who needs to know that their history is not just long, it is legendary, it is powerful, and it is beautiful. Thank you for watching, and remember, the past is only silent if we stop telling its stories. We will see you in the next chapter.